Jules Verne usually shares, together with H.G. Wells, the honour of being the father of the science fiction genre. But if we recognize that when Verne wrote his book From the Earth to the Moon, H.G. Wells wasn't even born yet, wouldn't it be fair to give Monsieur Verne all of the credit? Besides being the creator of the science fiction genre, what else was extraordinary about the world's third most translated author? Coming up in a moment. February 8th, 1828. On the Île Feydeau in Nantes, France, a boy is born to Pierre Verne and his wife Sophie. Everyone who knows the family assumes that this first-born son will one day take over the family law practice, becoming an attorney like his father, a man with an excellent reputation. They used to have a saying in Nantes at that time, as honest as Verne. 1 year later, his brother Paul is born. Paul would go on to become his good friend and later, as a sailor, a consultant in maritime affairs. In total, Jules will have 4 siblings, all younger than him, 1 brother and 3 sisters. In 1834, when Jules is 6 years old, he attends the school of Madame Samba, a widow of a sea captain who had gone missing at sea some 20 years earlier. Madame Samba keeps talking to her pupils about her husband, that one day he will return like Robinson Crusoe. These words fill young Jules with wild fantasies about faraway lands. A few years later, when their father buys a country cottage near the Levallois, Jules and his brother spend most of their time learning to sail. For 1 franc a day, they used to rent leaky old boats and tack up and down the river. In the summer of 1839, when Jules is 11 years old, he tries to sail off as a cabin boy on a 3-mast ocean-going ship called La Coralie. Fortunately, his family notices him missing, gathers information, and his father manages to catch Jules just in time before the ship leaves port. Jules is scalded, thrashed, and put on bread and water. His mother makes him promise that from now on he will only travel in his imagination. In 1847, after 13 years in local private schools, 19-year-old Jules moves to Paris to commence his law studies. His father puts him on a tight budget, giving Jules just 100 francs per month, of which 60 are spent on lodging. After paying for his meals, very little remains for anything else. Pierre intends this to teach his son the value of money. Jules occasionally asks for more and writes home that the classes are hard. The professors ask incredibly difficult questions on exams to which I have no answers, he says. While living in the capital, he uses his family connections to enter into Paris society. Chevalier d'Arpentigny introduces him to Alexandre de Montpère, who at that time is 47 years old and already at the height of his power. The two become close, and Jules seeks Dumas professional advice concerning the plays that he writes. On February 21st, 1849, he is even invited to sit in Dumas's lodge box at the premiere of his show La Jeunesse des Mousquetaires, the youth of 3 musketeers. Despite the hardships and his total disinterest in legal matters, Jules passes his bar exams at the end of the summer of 1849 and becomes a licensed lawyer. But determined instead to make himself a name in writing and to follow Dumas' advice to continue writing for theatre, he stays in Paris. In 1851, his father invites young Verne to return to Nantes to work at their family business. Jules refuses. He writes home, "It will be literature, Boel, since it is the only way that I will succeed, and since my mind is unalterably made up on this point, what is the use of repeating my ideas on this topic, since you know them already, dear father? And you also know that sooner or later, whether I practice law for 2 years or not, if I simultaneously pursue these two careers, the one will eventually destroy the other. In my mind, law does not hold out much hope for longevity." In the same year, in the literary magazine called Musée de Famille, his first 2 short stories are published: The First Ships of the Mexican Navy and A Voyage in a Balloon. At the end of this year, Verne witnesses the coup d'etat that ends the Second Republic. In December, he writes to his mother, "The fighting was intense on Thursday, such a disgrace, as is the general anger against the President of the Army, which fell short of its duty on this occasion. I do not know how all this will end, but I'm not getting involved." In 1852, with kind help from Dumas, Verne goes to work in the Théâtre Lyrique as a secretary, using his free time to write plays. The plays are not successful, and most of them will never be performed. In May 1856, a college friend invites Verne to his wedding in Amiens. There Jules meets Honorine, the sister of the bride, a widow of 26 with 2 daughters. A year later, Honorine and Jules become married. To support his new family, he borrows 50,000 francs from his father to buy 1/4 of a stock brokerage firm, which allows him to start working at the Paris Stock Exchange. As a broker, he is not very successful, however. Even though his childhood friend Jules works as a stockbroker in the same firm and helps Jules, he only manages to make ends meet. The reason for this is apparent. Jules gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning and writes until it's time to leave for work, starting at the stock exchange at 10. After work, he is usually in the library doing research. His thoughts are always filled with his creation. Verne's new friend, Gaspard Félix Tournachot, known by the pseudonym Nadar, is a journalist and a photographer, but is mostly known as a balloonist. He gives Jules the idea to write a novel about a balloon trip across Central Africa, which in that day was mostly unexplored and uncharted terrain. The extensive research and then writing about a slightly fictional technology takes Verne more than 2 years. His wife Honorine, who considers ballooning an absurd activity, is eventually totally fed up with her husband working on the story. When the manuscript is finished, she exclaims, "Thank heavens, he is finally through with his balloon." Little does she know that the same balloon will make her a wealthy woman. Verne shows his new manuscript to Dumas. Dumas likes it and introduces him to novelist Berhat. Through him, Verne gets to Hetzel, the most influential publisher in France at the time. Pierre Jules Hetzel not only publishes the book in the same year, 1863, but makes a deal with Verne for his future novels. Verne would go on to write 3 volumes a year, and Hetzel would pay 1,925 francs. Well, that is $13,000 in 2021 money for each work. The next year, Verne pens Journey to the Center of the Earth, and in 1865, From the Earth to the Moon, the first of Verne's science fiction masterpieces. In this book, Verne makes astounding predictions about the first real space flights toward the Earth's natural satellite. Even though the interior of the of Verne's spaceship resembles a 19th century living room with gas lights, sofas and a library, many aspects of this capsule match those of the NASA expedition 100 years into the future. First of all, the Americans launched it, not Great Britain, whose GDP was nearly twice as big as that of the US at that time, not to say anything about the technological and industrial advancement of the British Empire, while the United States back then had primarily an agricultural economy. Even though the French GDP was only a third of that of Great Britain, in the middle of the 19th century, Verne's home country was also more technologically advanced than the US, and so was the German Empire. Nevertheless, Verne predicted it right. Verne's spacecraft starts from Florida, as did all Apollo missions. The first Apollo craft to reach moon orbit was Apollo 8, which took off in December. Likewise, Verne's space capsule was launched in December. Apollo 11, which actually landed on the moon, was called Columbia. The cannon that launched Verne's spaceship was called Columbiad. Just as all Apollos on their return splashed into the Pacific Ocean, so did Verne's capsule. Moreover, Verne made his spaceship of aluminium, and so did NASA 100 years later. Verne's spaceship had a crew of 3, and so did all the manned Apollo missions. Some similarities can even be found in the names of the crew members. Verne's characters were Arden, Barbicane and Mitchell, while the Apollo 8 flew Anders, Borman and Lovell. Verne also described weightlessness, the need for oxygen, and even that scooting through the atmosphere creates enormous heat. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is first published from 1869 to 1870 about an ocean-going submarine called Nautilus. Verne gets the idea from an underwater vessel named Plongeur. The French Navy built it in 1863 and debuted it at the Exposition Universelle of 1867, where Jules studied it in detail. But Plongeur was only a small craft that, using compressed air, could move a few nautical miles from its spaceship to ram an enemy vessel or plant a mine. Verne's Nautilus doesn't use compressed air. When Professor Aronnax, the protagonist of the story, asks about the force that drives Nautilus, Captain Nemo says the following: "There is an agent, powerful, obedient, rapid, easily obtainable, which lends itself to all usages and which is on control on board the ship. It operates everything. It gives me light, warmth. It is the heart of my engines. This agent is electricity." Now, the most primitive batteries and electric motors of the time were by no means capable of moving a 1,500-ton submarine. The only practical use of electricity back then was sending telegraphic messages. Electric lights on board Nautilus were a complete invention, as the incandescent light bulb would be patented only several decades later, as with the electric heater that heats the interior of the submarine. In 1889, in the story In the Year 2889, Verne describes how newspapers will be replaced by interesting conversations with reporters, statesmen and scientists. Instead of being a whole millennia away, radio broadcasting began just 3 decades later. The story also describes video conferences, chemical warfare, natality control in China and phototelegrams from Mars and Venus. Pneumatic tubes across the oceans that allow passengers to travel at 1,500 kilometers per hour and flying cars are still yet to come. Well, like is the custom these days, as always, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing now by